Welcome to this edition of Open Camera Slider by DIY3DTech.com. In this episode, we're going to take a look at building this non-linear camera slider that we 3D printed. So we've got all the parts set up over here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through and I'm going to walk you through the assembly process. Also worth note, all these parts will be, at least the 3D printed parts will be out on Thingiverse. So let's get into the build process. So before we get into the actual build, one of the things I want to talk about is how does this actually work. So what I did is I modeled this actually off a pantograph, and for those of you old school enough to remember, a pantograph would have another two arms, a little bit smaller size built in here. And the idea is if you had a tracing element here and you trace this, the pantograph would draw a smaller element here, or if you use this element to trace whatever object beneath it and put a pencil or pen in here, it would create a larger object. And so that's the basic concept. Now, many moons ago, back in the Apple II days, I actually built one of these and machined it, if you will. And what I did is I had a potentiometer here and a potentiometer here. And this actually fed into the joystick ports because remember back in the day, potentiometers were actually analog devices on an Apple II. And a stylus, basically just a plastic pencil, went in here and you could trace something. And what would happen is that would be represented then inside the computer. And it was a very crude, actually, first attempt at a CAD device for computerized drawing. Now that was many moons ago, probably about 30 or so. But it was a very interesting device, and that's sort of what I modeled this after. Is what this is based upon that. There are two arms which are the same length, they're the same arms, just two of them printed, and they're tied upon two axes. And so what happens is this will rotate, this camera will rotate across this axis. Now notice how this holds it constrained with inside of a plane. Now you have to be a little bit talented to make the movements happen, and I'm just kind of going fast so you can kind of see. But if you reference it to the lines, it holds it actually within inside that plane. Now this tripod, this desktop tripod, Manfrotto tripod, is a little bit light for this duty, so that's why I'm having to hold it. I've actually designed this for a larger tripod. And also I think I'm going to design up a plaster Paris or something, concrete filled counterweight, that this sits on a desktop and I can move it far easier, as well as I'm going to probably have an additional piece come out of here to grab a hold to, so I don't have to hold on to this piece. But as you can see, if I move my hand out of the way, all the different dynamic movements that this can make, which is really interesting. And the way that this actually works is around a set of 608 ZZ bearings. So there's actually 8 of them, so there's 4 in each arm. We're going to have two sets of pins here. So one's going to pin this piece together. One's going to pin this to the tripod holder, which is this piece here. And then the other one's going to pin to the actual tripod holder itself. So once we get all this assembled, again, we'll end up with one of these. So it actually goes together pretty good. And I like the idea that it's very compact. You can throw it in a camera bag, etc. Run with it, and very portable device. And you can see I have got my old iPhone 4S, which I use for a lot of shooting around the 3D printers and that kind of stuff on here. So let's get to the assembly, talk about the assembly piece a little bit. So one of the first pieces is going to be the arms. Now you will have to print these. I recommend printing these with support, so you see a little bit of infill support that I've cleaned out here, sitting on the bed like this. Also, what I do is I take a clean out tool, run it around the inside of this race to taper it a little bit to insert the bearings, and then what we do is we'll press the bearings in. Now what we'll do is we're going to utilize this vise. I'm going to move this off to the side for a little bit. And one of the things, this might be a little bit tedious, but I also suggest doing one side at a time. I tried to get a little ambitious once and do 2 sides, and it just does not work out very well. So you kind of center the bearing inside of the arm, and then what you do is you open up the vise, and this actually works better if it's on the edge of a table. And then what you want to do is I start with the high side of the vise and get it started in. So now it's fairly started in. And then now what I'm going to do is put the center of it in here. And again, this works better if it's on the side of a table, so it actually allows you to spin it all the way around, but obviously it's hitting the bench, so it's stopping it. And then so you just simply tighten that down. And see, there you go. The bearing should be roughly flush with this. Now what we'll do is we'll, repeat this 8 times, if you will. And then we will be finished with the arms. So since you guys get the basic idea, what I'm going to do is from here speed it up until we complete the arms. Okay, so we're back. We've got all 8 bearings pressed in, and sorry I had to move the vise back a little bit and some of that time lapse because it's just easier if this end could spin past the edge of the table. And they're all pressed in, and one of the things you notice, if they went in a little bit cockeyed, I could just kind of square it up in the end by putting this back in and touching it up a little bit. However, all that came out pretty good. So we now have this piece set. So the next component we need to do is attach these two arms together. So what we're going to do is we have a couple pieces. These are actually tops. It's these thicker ones that are going to pin these together. And what they're going to do is they're going to go like this together. And then what we're going to do is use one of these at the top with a washer. Because now one of the things I should mention is I'm using these cap head, well, these sort of flat cap head hex bolts. I've got these at Harbor Freight. You can buy like a box of them from under 10 bucks with the washers and everything. And what this does is a couple different pieces. So there's an insert that goes inside the bearing, and then there's also a race on here that goes against the race of the bearing. And so what this does is actually slides in like that. And then what'll happen is this piece will slide in like so. Now these should be a little bit snugger fit, shouldn't be super tight. If they're too tight, you might want to take a little bit of sandpaper, but they should not be loose. And so they will pull down. And then basically what will happen is the bolt will pull through the two pieces. So what we'll do is we'll utilize this longer bolt to go through this piece. We'll start at the top, and then we just you kind of thread this through. And because the plastic is rather tight, it'll sort of thread into the plastic also. So it'll take a little bit of work to get this through the whole piece. And you just kind of hold it, and I'm just taking a hex driver and running this through. So tell you what, I'm going to speed this piece up a little bit. Okay, so now we have this piece in there. So this is now fit in the bearing. It spins around. Might have to get a little bit loosened up depending on how the plastic is and everything. But this is pretty good. You want a little bit of friction on there, not a whole lot. So it turns rather smooth. So you can kind of spin it around. Get the idea. So what this does, and it really doesn't matter. You can pick your aesthetic side. And this, again, will pop through, and this piece will insert, so now you begin seeing, and again, the race on this plastic piece will press against the race on the bearing, and then what we'll do is we'll simply take another one of these end caps, push that on here, put this over, and then we will put this on. Now this is a locking nut, it comes with it. I do recommend a locking nut or a lock washer just to make sure this is tightened up, and then we'll go ahead and tighten this. Now when you tighten this, you don't want this super tight, you only want it snug. And that's one of the reasons for utilizing the lock washer, or the nylon locking washer I should say, on this side. Is what's going to happen is this is going to tighten up against the nylon in there, and you're going to get a nice smooth movement with that, because again this is holding as one assembly because it's tightening against this nylon in here rather than tightening too tight against the races. Again, you shouldn't have any lateral motion being able to pull this way, so you get a nice smooth movement this way. Okay, so now with that part done, what we need to do is attach it to the tripod base. Now the tripod base, if you noticed in a previous video that I did, when I printed this I inserted 2 1/4-20 nuts inside of here, and so that's in there, and pretty much like these guys, it simply slides into the bottom of the race. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take one of these guys, another one, again a washer. And one of the reasons I'm using the washer here is to kind of distribute the force kind of in a unified fashion across here, especially since this is plastic. The metal washers really work great, and they're really attuned to this size, if you will. And also I'll probably have this one, I'm just kind of tightening this up and thinking about it, I'll probably have the OpenSCAD code for this out on the OpenSCAD site, so you might want to check there. I think I'm going to post it. I'm definitely going to post the STLs on Thingiverse. I haven't decided yet on the OpenSCAD code. This is a rather cool project, or at least I think it's a cool project. So just again utilizing this to tighten it up. That's tightened up, and then what we'll do is we'll just place it through here, and again we'll have to thread it through the plastic a little bit, and then what this will do is thread into the top. And again, you don't want it too tight. And then now the last final piece is to take this and again put this in here, use the washer, tighten this on. And again, you can mess around with bolt sizes because I think these guys happen to be about 35 millimeter bolts, and I think this other guy is like a 60. Again, they just come standard in the pack, and depending on this guy, you might have to adjust his size a little bit too, depending upon the nuts you use. The particular ones I use, you can use the size, but if you happen to use a little bit slightly different one, you might change the length. And again, I'm just gonna tighten this guy down. And then what we're going to do is we're going to stick this guy up through the bottom here, again into the bearing, and had it sitting off to the side. And then what we're going to do is we're going to stick this guy through here. You know what? And I might have lied on the size of this one. I might need the one up. Let me go double check to see how short that is. The other thing you could probably do is put a washer on here and screw this to the top of the washer, but I like the little height that this sets on. Let me try a little bit different size. Okay, sorry about that. I had to go from a 35 to roughly a 50 to cover the extra, because I wasn't thinking when I got the bolts out of the box to do this, because it's got to pass through this other one. And hopefully I picked the right size again. This one might be too long. Yeah, we'll see. And again, you can adjust this how you want, because I am going to, in a future version, add to it a handle that hooks on here so you can hold it. And then, long story short, what's going to happen is this is just going to spin on top of here, and you can kind of see what's happening. So I think this is going to be, nope, I think I'm going to have to go with a little bit shorter bolt in this one. The challenge is the live TV. Okay, so I've decided now, since the 50 was a little bit too long, the 35 was too short, the 50 was too long, I've gone with the 45, so we'll meet in the middle. Let's give this one a try. Now, one of the things, I do get some comments on this, and I could edit this out that I screwed up on the bolts, but I'd really like you guys to see this because I get a lot of comments, hey, that was unprofessional, you should have checked first. But one of the things is, I want you guys to see what really happens, because we all know things like that happen. And again, I think it's good to share those learning experiences. But that aside, I think this one will bring me a lot closer. So anyways, let me screw this in. And one of the things that you can also do, you don't have to use one of these tripod tops. You can also use one of these, what I refer to pins. These are also thicker to adjust the same difference because you're simply screwing this down. So if you find that your bolt choice is a little bit challenging, like this one can be, then because this is a little bit different top than the one you probably can't see, I'm pointing to it. This is a little bit different top than I used over here. So it's not probably going to screw in as far, but again, you'll kind of get the picture. So there you go. Now you could also put some washers in here. I'm just for demonstration purposes going to leave this because this bolt isn't screwing in as far into it as it did on this one. So again, I could utilize, instead of the tripod cap, I could utilize one of these pins which are thicker, or place a couple washers, or one of the things I'm going to do, so watch for updates, is put that in there. But anyways, kind of long story short, now what you have is this arm just like this assembled. So really a cool project and really a lot of fun to work with. You get a lot of interesting video and effects, you know, panning across, especially smaller objects. I like to use it on the bench, you know, to kind of get, you know, close up, you know, pans and that kind of stuff of going across the desk like you see here. Because one thing I am going to mix up, as I've already mentioned, is a table weight, where this bolts to a counterweight on the table and sits here and sits up a little bit higher, and then so I can just actually, because what I want to do is I'm going to do a version that sits on this bench right here as I'm doing videos, and I can just, you know, really quickly just go through and whip something up and then add that video to my format. So anyways, I will have this out on Thingiverse, and hey, go ahead, print it if you do. You know, please let me know you printed it. You know, put a make up there on Thingiverse. You can follow me on Thingiverse also. And I'd like to hear any comments. What you think I can do to make this better or improve this design? Happy to hear it. And hey, so hit the thumbs up. Also, don't forget the subscribe button is going to be coming up over there. So subscribe if you're not already a subscriber. And hey, we'll see you in the next video. Cheers.
Please click like below and subscribe to the channel to keep up to date on all of our projects.